Hi there and welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and finish up this knife in this video, and here you can see basically what it's going to look like in the end. So to begin with, I wanted to do a little bit extra work on the tang to make the fit up of the guard or bolster a lot easier. And also needed to do the heat treat. I apologize for the camera. I'd lost the original footage since I had to use the iPhone stuff, so here we go. Once the knife was quenched and treated, I put it between pieces of angle iron, and I don't know if this is really necessary, but I used some compressed air and just added some extra cooling to the actual edge itself. And once I removed it from the angle iron, it pretty much looked like that was the case mostly. So I decided to clean off a little bit of the excess oil and get off some of the extra scale, mostly for tempering so I could see the colors once we do that. Once again, into the oven at 400 degrees. Again, silence is the best option for using the inside oven. That said, not everything always goes to plan.
Well, I did a bonehead thing. After the tempering, I had noticed, to try to counter what I thought was a bend in the blade, I had set it up so that it would bend the other way during the temper. Well, that was a bad choice. I should have just left that alone, and it probably would have been just straight as an arrow and would have been fine. But instead, I didn't do that. What I ended up doing was annealing it or normalizing it again, and then afterwards heat treating it. Well, you may not be able to tell exactly, but there's a bow back here, and when I had heat treated it again, the bow went kind of that way. In fact, when I run my finger along here, I can feel right about here is where that kind of comes up. So, or bends down, bows down, where the actual blade came straight. So there's probably about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or so of space that would be here that I'm trying to correct. Now, that said, it did make some spots a little bit more thin, and then it caused that ribbon effect, which if you're familiar, if you've done this stuff before, then you'll know that basically all that really happened is I had, the edge was just way too thin, and everything else was hardening after it already was, and then causing basically it from going like this to kind of like that, kind of like an S wave. So anyway, I've got most of that out. It still had some in it, but what I found later on, I put the blade in the vise here, and I have these vise grips that are wide, and I was able to get hold of enough of the blade that was either wavy or unstraight, and then I could just, with a little bit of pressure, pull it over. So far it looks pretty good, and I can't really complain. I'm going to try to salvage it, and if not, we're just going to end up with a shorter blade. So we'll see what happens.
So right here I'm kind of pointing out the spots that were really thin, and we got to just kind of get around those. So I'm going to draw a straight line and see if we can't get those out. The big thing here is when you're trying to grind that edge like I am here is you got to keep it cool or you will absolutely ruin whatever temper that you happen to have put on there. So you'll see me dipping the blade quite a bit. And that water was cold, by the way. But now that the blade has been ground to final shape, it's time for our favorite topic, hand sanding. And wet hand sanding, just as much fun. Now that we have it to a mirror polish, we go ahead and start hand washing it with just some regular dish soap. And I usually go with the thought process, if I think that it's clean, I'm going to wash it one more time. I've been told that there's usually a secret recipe of like a 1-to-1 mix ferric chloride to water, but I've just kind of added water as needed, so I have no idea what the percentage is on this. But they always seem to turn out, no matter what the percentage of water to ferric chloride is, and all I'm doing right here is using some Windex or glass cleaner to neutralize that acid. Now we move on to the guard. Right here all I'm doing is basically making it flat on the bottom or the top, depending on your point of view. And with a little layout fluid I mark about where I want the tang to actually go into the guard or bolster itself as well. Once we have a good idea where we want the tang to go, usually we'll drill holes initially for the tang on the bolster. And because I've got the benchtop mini mill, use that to finish off the last of the tang hole slot in the bolster itself. That all said, that's a kind of an initial process, because I always like to, or I tend to like to anyway, do a hot fit of the bolster onto the blade, which you take a big chance with potentially ruining a temper, but again, it usually comes out. All I'm doing here is taking, now that I've got it fitted, just putting some texturing it with a small ball peen. It does leave a little bit of oxidation, which I just use a wire wheel to get that all cleaned off. To add a nice accent to the entire blade, I decided I wanted to use some elk antler in it. It just kind of really helps set the whole thing off and bring it all together. All I'm doing here is marking the center of this bog oak, which is, I don't know, the description was about 1,000 to 6,000 years old, so that's a pretty big time gap. We do that so that we can drill the holes, or drill holes rather, for the tang to eventually sit in, as well as a whole bunch of epoxy. Here what I'm doing is I'm squaring off the end, or actually I'd already done this at this point, but what I'm doing is I am cutting off 1/8 inch pieces to add, and you'll see why here in a little bit. Now that we've got all the pieces cut out, there's a piece of silver for a spacer. Actually, I had 3 of those. There's the bolster I just sat down. There's the handle. And I also have 2 pieces of that 1/8 inch thick bog oak and the piece of bone. But of course, everything's got to be flat, so back to the flat rock. This actually made quite a mess. Gouging out all that bone. It took a lot longer than I was hoping for, so I had to stop for a snack. And yes, that's Alfredo pizza, and I like ranch on it. Don't judge. What we're doing here is just trimming off a little of the excess nickel silver from the bolster that I didn't need. And then we're going to shape it just a little bit, not quite to the final shape. That comes a little bit later on in the final fitting. Personally, I think there are 2 parts of the whole build that are really the most stressful. The first one being heat treat that you saw at the beginning, and of course the last one, epoxying everything together, because if it's not straight, it looks like garbage. Fortunately for me, everything worked out, and I have enough that I actually needed to grind some off. And then we return to our favorite, more hand sanding. Yay. Between grits of sandpaper, and I usually go from about 120 all the way to 2000, I'll use an air hose just to get any excess dust out. It makes it a lot nicer when you do the finish. Even with all the mess ups that I had on this blade, it still came out pretty nice. If you've stuck around this long, then you must like what you see, and I surely do appreciate you sticking around to the end. It sure would be a great favor to me if you would hit the subscribe button. I'm growing this channel slowly, but it's happening, and your support is greatly appreciated. If you like this and other builds, check back in, and we'll see you in the next video.